what does the word chaos mean to you guys? We have it all the time. That's what makes the sport the greatest sport on the face of the earth. But the whole playoff chaos theory, if we still want to call it a theory, there's a thing that it is, which is just who's the last team in. And then there's all the stuff leading up to the playoff. And the more I think about this thing and the more I talk to some folks around the sport, the more I think we may be headed towards some pretty unprecedented playoff chaos because we've obviously never had a 12-team playoff. Late kick, jam-packed. We are sort of high atop a talked-out downtown Indianapolis, Indiana. We're at Big Ten Media Days, and so we've been here for 3 days. I'm about to hit the road right after we get done with the show Thursday, July 25th, the Overlord 2024. I'm going to talk to you about some stuff I think may end up being the case with the playoff. Some of you will like it. I don't know how many of you won't like it, honestly. I don't want to speak for you. I'm just going to float it out there, tell you what I think could happen. You can agree or disagree. The whole Big Ten Media Days thing. I'm not doing a recap of Big Ten Media Days. What I wanted to do is I wanted to offer you guys a kind of a glimpse into some of the stuff that we've been hearing, some of the stuff that I've picked up on record, off record, and whatnot. So I'm going to give you some of that. I'm going to give you both predictions. I'm going to give you what ifs. We've got Dan Lanning on the show for a good 25 to 30 minutes. He was kind enough to join us, and we got right to the core of what a lot of you talk about when you talk about Oregon. I think even if you're not an Oregon fan, you'll probably greatly enjoy it. It's very, very reminiscent of the Speaker Series stuff that we did back in the spring that literally everyone loved, by the way, and I appreciate the compliments we've gotten on that. So Dan Lanning at the end of the show. They're watching us in West Palm Beach, Florida, Statesboro, Georgia, Alvin, Texas, Reno, Nevada. Thank you guys so much. At Late Kick Josh, anytime we're on the road, man, I try and give you guys as much behind the scenes. Honestly, I could have done a better job this week, I know, but we've been really busy. But we're on the road every Saturday in the fall, and the stuff that we give you, especially in that Instagram story, behind the scenes, at Late Kick Josh, that stuff's really good in the fall. Okay, let's dive into the show tonight. So I've been at Big Ten Media Days all week. Now, when I come to this stuff, I don't look forward to the press conferences because I don't think we get a whole lot out of that. When we go on the road in the spring and I sit down with these head coaches, that's when we get the really good stuff. So I don't come to these for that. I don't come to hear the players give us scoop on the record that we otherwise wouldn't have gotten. When I come to this stuff, I'm trying to find out as much as I can. I'm trying to get as many people who know these teams to raise the hood and to let me look under it. And some of it's off the record, but honestly, even the off-the-record stuff, it can greatly benefit the way we talk about these teams on the record. So with USC, with Lincoln Riley, I think that there's a lot to like about the team, but there's also huge red flags about the team. So Lincoln Riley came in here yesterday, as you and I are talking on Thursday, and he said something that if you've been watching the show for a little while should not have surprised you. He said, we're still playing catch-up. Some of you thought that was excuse-making. Okay, you're free to think that. He's not lying to you when he says we're still playing catch-up. And he's not just talking about from a coaching standpoint. This stuff's hard enough to coach. They are still playing catch-up. Defensively, he brought Alex Grinch over there. It was a failure. And he had to admit that 2 years in, hit the dump button, go across town, get Deonton Lynn as his new defensive coordinator. So that stuff they're playing catch-up in. That's in his control, though. The stuff outside of his control, he kind of talked about that. He alluded to it. We're playing catch-up. Just because you go to USC doesn't mean you get all the trappings and the glamour of Southern California baked into your football program. And what I mean by that more directly is they are behind on NIL, okay? So that's what he's talking about. That's the 50,000-foot stuff. What I was talking about with a bunch of folks around USC when it comes to that team about is Miller Moss, they got very little doubt about. I got very little doubt about Miller Moss. I think the receiver room probably even maybe a little underrated with some of the young guys in there. I think the defensive line questions are absolutely real. I didn't talk to anyone that alleviated that concern for me. And so, look, you could tell the demeanor of Lincoln Riley. He kind of rolled in here and acted like I'd act. He acted like someone who was kind of over talking about all this stuff. It kind of is what it is. You just want to go play ball. But having those concerns and having those limitations, if you really do have that on the defensive line, it puts such a ceiling on your program that's below Big Ten championship level. Now, here's the follow-up to that. If you look at their schedule right now, they play LSU week 1. LSU's got some of those same questions. They play at Michigan week 3. Michigan, if you're going to have to go to the big house, this is the year that you want to, right? There's never an easy time to play Michigan, but certainly you'd rather play them this year than last year. A little bit later down the road, at Minnesota, at Maryland, at Washington, a total rebuild. So there's this world where the glass is more half full on USC, and maybe, just maybe, they catch some teams that were expected to be a little more up and they're down. So this is not an indictment as if to say there's no way they can compete. It's just I think they have to have some things outside their control go right for them to compete. Oregon, there's something to pay attention to here. So Bo Nix out, Dylan Gabriel in. It may very well be that we get to the end of the year and we look at the skill set of Dylan Gabriel. And I'm talking about in the games against Ohio State, big-time games. Games where the opposing team matches them roster-wise. There aren't many of them. It may be that we get to the end of the year and we look and we say, Bo Nix was actually a better quarterback than Gabriel. Because I don't think Dylan Gabriel has elite, like top-tier physical attributes. He's a very cerebral player. He's a very sharp player. He's plenty good enough. Don't get me wrong, plenty good enough to do what they want him to do. He's not a guy that's about to go in there and wow you from a raw physical standpoint. They got a really good offensive staff at Oregon. But what I'm trying to say is if anyone's out there trying to fool themselves into thinking Oregon's upgrading at quarterback from Bo Nix, they are not doing that. So then the follow-up question is, well, okay, Bo Nix at quarterback and the rest of the supporting cast, that was not good enough to get Oregon where they wanted to go. So why should I be sold that now he being Dylan Gabriel, will be good enough to get them where they want to go? And, hey, that's a fair question, which is why I haven't talked a lot about quarterback. If I loosely trade that, if I just view it as a wash, I'm looking at line of scrimmage play. And for a couple of years now, you've heard me very intentionally talk about versatility with Oregon because what Lanning did was he was at Alabama and he was at Georgia and he watched what those guys did. So Nick Saban and Kirby Smart both recruit the same way. What they do is you go get the best of the best, but what you do is you stack talent in the defensive front to where you can be very, very multiple and very versatile because you don't play the same team every week. Just like Oregon on their schedule here, you go like Michigan State, but then you play Ohio State the next week. Defensively, I may want to present very, very different things to one versus the other. If you have the depth and the versatility in depth, which is what a lot of people around the program keep preaching, then you can do both. I think they have that. That's not a guarantee of anything, but it is a guarantee that from a man-to-man standpoint, there probably is one team, maybe two in this conference, that match up personnel-wise with them defensively. Ryan Day and Ohio State are one of them. So Ryan Day has a really unique challenge on his hand. When we had him on the show a couple of nights ago, I asked him to talk about pressure. And I did that for a reason because a lot of folks talk about pressure around Ryan Day. A lot of people would say, well, if he can't get it done, Michigan game doesn't go their way, they don't win at all, whatever you fill in the blank with, then maybe he's on the hot seat. Now, I think that's ludicrous, but who cares? I don't make the decisions up there. But my point there was there's this pressure. If you guys were around the program, you'd kind of feel it. You'd stop thinking about the outside pressure because there's so much pressure inside the program competitively that guys like him and folks like the folks at Ohio State put on themselves that it's almost an afterthought, kind of the outside noise. Now, that doesn't quiet down the outside noise, but it does mean that I don't think it makes them as uncomfortable as some may believe it makes them. The thing they have to do is they have to be a little bit better in some areas, and they have the ability to do whatever they want. So we had Ryan Day on the show, and I asked him, hey, when you get to the end of a season, you got beat by Michigan again, and they took it to you physically again. You can recruit any kind of player you want. You can go portal in any kind of player you want. You have the kind of depth and talent on your own roster to be whoever you want to be. Is there a feeling that we're Ohio State, we're going to stick with who we are and do what we do? Or do you look around and say, no, we actually want to tweak this and change that? Notice what he said. He didn't get into specifics, but Ryan Day said, yeah, we identified some stuff. Yeah, we know we got to change some stuff. That is code for we should be the ones taking the sledgehammer to people. We should never get to the end of an Ohio State football game and have folks talking about how we got it taken to us physically, how we were the second most physical team on the field. He didn't say that, but he's insinuating that, and he's right about that. That's the whole attitude around the program. And for all these transfer portal moves, pay attention to the guys that were already on the team that return. That's the key for Ohio State and fulfilling their immense potential this year. Jonathan Smith, I think, is going to win at Michigan State. So I said that on Twitter. I got accused of not being specific enough. I think Michigan State, not this year, but in the coming years, will be the team that every year when we come to this event will be circled as a dark horse. The people who know the conference will call them a dark horse. I think Jonathan Smith walked in and his head was swimming initially at Michigan State, coming from Oregon State, about how recruiting may work in that part of the country, the whole NIL structure, and what the going rate is in the NIL market. You're having to learn from scratch. There's nothing that equips you for that. I don't care where you've coached. I don't care how good you've been. That stuff, it's not like it's eased up just because he's a few months into the job now. That stuff takes some time. I am telling you, I'm very confident in saying this. From a raw football standpoint, Jonathan Smith knows what he's doing. And so everything that Michigan State should be their identity, it kind of overlaps with what his identity is. That was what they were at Oregon State, by the way. So I don't have any doubt there. Like, their over-under win total is 4.5 this year. I have no clue where I'd go on that. I think they'll be a pretty bad team this year. I think in the coming years they'll be a winner. They will be a consistent contender there. And Jedd Fisch, man, I think you just saw him walk behind the camera here. Washington's about to head out the door. Total reset. There was some thought that, well, if you go to a national championship game and then you get a new guy in, maybe there's some carryover. There's no carryover. You got an entirely new roster. He was sitting behind me a little while ago. I heard someone ask, what's the biggest challenge? He said, building a roster. Like, we're starting from the ground up pretty much. You kind of are, but you kind of aren't. Because there's one very important thing to remember when you're taking over a job. Most guys take over a job because the guy before them wasn't good enough and he got fired, which means you have probably some cultural rot and you really have to rebuild everything. Jedd Fisch has taken over for a guy who was so good, Alabama wanted him and came and got him. So there may not be a bunch of returning starters around, but there's a great program that he's inheriting. So you don't really have to rebuild it. It's not like a dump truck. You don't have to rebuild the dump truck. It's just the stuff that was in the back got dumped out, and so you have to refill that. But there's a refill versus a rebuild. Jedd Fisch doesn't have to rebuild anything. He just has to refill. There's a lot of folks in this conference who would tell you the collection of coaching right now is as good as it's ever been. And they're going past the surface. They're going to Fickle at Wisconsin. They're going to Jedd Fisch. They're going to Matt Rule at Nebraska. You've got a guy like P.J. Fleck, who all of a sudden is one of the most tenured coaches in this conference. It's a really deep lineup. It's a steady lineup. And finally some depth to it of overall coaching talent. And by the way, Greg Schiano at Rutgers. Just Greg Schiano at Rutgers. So that's some of the stuff we were hearing from Big Ten Media Days this week. I am happy that you guys are with us. Thank you so much. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And you can do that on podcast as well. That is how we keep the show free of charge and maintain our ability to basically do whatever we want to, go wherever we want to. We appreciate that. All right, let's talk about some of the biggest what-ifs in this sport this year. We've been doing this for like a month and a half, and it's gotten great results because you guys keep giving me ideas. Like one of you asked about conference championship chaos, and you talked about college football playoff chaos, and I think it's coming. I think it's absolutely on the horizon. So I don't know what you think about when I say that, but here's what I think about. So I want you to follow me here. So we got the whole auto bid structure where the 4 highest ranked conference champs get the number 1, 2, 3, and 4 seeds and first round buys in the playoff. Okay, we all know that. The next thing you start to do this time of year is you start to pencil in who you think the conference champs are going to be. We just did that Sunday night. The video's on our YouTube channel right now. And that's all well and good. Everyone will do that. No one ever predicts the chaos. That's the whole nature of chaos. It's unpredictable. So let me paint you a couple of scenarios that I think we may be headed towards. The first one is the kind of situation where you have multiple upsets in conference championship games. So let's say FSU's 12-0, and they're facing a 9-3 Virginia Tech in the ACC championship game, and Virginia Tech just pulls the upset. Virginia Tech's in. They're automatically in. Florida State's still in as well. And it's almost like a bracket buster. It's almost like a team bumped off the bubble like we talk about in March Madness all the time, because an unexpected 9-3, an otherwise unworthy team at 9-3 also becomes 10-3 conference champ Virginia Tech. Well, they're in, and FSU's still in because they're 12-1. They just get bumped down the ladder a little bit. But what if that happens and you have a situation like Utah's 11-1, facing a 9-3 Iowa State. Iowa State pulls the upset. Boom, you've got another bracket buster. You got another auto bid there. You got Virginia Tech, Iowa State, and what are we doing with 11-1 Utah? They're from a weaker conference. You know, maybe they came in as the 8th seed going into conference championship weekend. Maybe they were ranked 8th. Are they going to get punished for making their conference title game to the point where they're out of the playoff? Where the Big 10, or the Big 12 rather, could sit around and say, wait. So you're telling me if we just didn't have a conference title game, Utah would have gotten in? Yes. Why did we even play this? So that's a couple things that can happen. Also, think about this. Think about how mad this would make some of you, me as well. If you had, let's say, the 9-3 Virginia Tech win their conference and the 9-3 Iowa State win their conference, well, those are two auto bids. Are they among the 4 highest-ranked conference champs, though? Because if Liberty goes 13-0, conference title included there, maybe Liberty's one of the 4 highest-ranked conference champs. Maybe Memphis is one of the highest-ranked conference champs. Maybe they take one of those first-round buys. Because, you know, to this point, any playoff projection I've seen, mine included, there's a G5 team in because there has to be, but they've always been like the 12 seed. They haven't been one of the top 4 seeds. They've been in only because you have to put them in. What if they're more than just in? You know, what if a G5 gets a first-round bye, and what if you had like a LSU or Georgia or you know, Oregon go on the road to Liberty for a first-round playoff game? Hey, some people say that's great. Some people say that's great. That's as far as I want to go with that. The other thing, I was talking to Brett McMurphy earlier today. He bounced a scenario off of me I had not thought of, candidly. He said, hey, there's also a world where you have a Utah, and maybe Utah's already a 2-loss team. Or maybe they're a 2-loss team, but they're guaranteed to be in the Big 12 championship game. Maybe it's just been a chaotic year there. There aren't very many good teams. Utah's 9-2 going into their last game, which is at UCF, by the way. So what if Utah is 9-2? They're going into their last game of the season. They already know they're going to the conference title game. If that was the case, Utah would know the outcome of the UCF game is meaningless because we're already not going to get in as an at-large. The only shot we have at the playoff is to win the conference. So we got a conference title game on deck. We're going to go rest starters. If you don't think that would be the case, you're crazy. I don't care who you are. I don't care how long and grizzled your coaching career has been. If you go into a final weekend knowing the outcome of this game really is meaningless because our only shot at the playoff is winning our conference, you're going to rest up and get ready for the conference title game. If we see any of that stuff happen, to me that would be pretty chaotic, and it's a little off the radar. It's not something someone would expect. Here's another what-if for you. This has nothing to do with the playoff. I'm shifting a little bit. Everyone assumes things about this sport. One thing you've come to set your watch by is Iowa's offense is going to be bad. So there's good reason to think that. Iowa's offense has been bad for a long time. And yet still, the program has had 8+ wins in 8 of 9 seasons. So they've still been good. Defense has been rock solid. Last year, you're looking at the numbers here. Total yards per game, 133rd. Points per game, 132nd. The best that Colin and Jesse could do is rush yards per game, where they were only 109th in the country last year. But defense, top 10 almost across the board. So they got rid of their offensive coordinator. Tim Lester is now the OC there. They're gonna up-tempo it a little bit. Going to go a little more air raid. What happens? This is a really big what if. What happens if Iowa's pretty good offensively? I'm not going to say great. That's beyond the scope even for this show. But what if they're just pretty good? What do we have to have there? You got to have Cade McNamara be healthy and be consistent, and he's been that before. You got to have him be healthy and be consistent. The new offense has to correlate with the new skill guys emerging like Caleb Brown. But just picture a world, if you will, where Iowa is still what they were defensively, but they're pretty good offensively. I'll tell you what they're probably still not good enough to do. They're probably not good enough to win the Big Ten. Probably not. But they're absolutely good enough to go, 10-2. And you know what they're good enough to do at 10-2? That's lock in one of those at-large spots. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, 10-2 in the Big Ten. At-large playoff berth. If Iowa locks up one of those 5, 6, 7, or 8 seeds, you may mess around and have a Southern team have to go up to Iowa in the middle of December. And that's not one I think is on anyone's radar. Now, I got another one for you. Let's go to Missouri for just a second. Here's another what if. What if Brady Cook to Luther Burden ends up being the best quarterback to wide receiver duo in college football this year. We saw the beginnings of it last year. So Cook last year, it got 27 starts under his belt. Last year, 21 touchdowns, 6 turnovers. I think he had another 8 touchdowns on the ground. He's very, very, very versatile, dual threat, very good, but he waned at the end of the year. Luther Burden, 86 catches over 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns, but he waned at the end of the year. So what if they don't? What if they start hot? What if they finish hot? You've obviously got Heisman consideration there, but also if they're not front-loaded, if they have consistency in performance over the entire season, they face 4 top 25 teams. Only one of them's in the top 10. Missouri faces Alabama the 26th of October. That's the only preseason top 10 odds team. We don't have an AP poll out yet, but we're talking FanDuel odds to win the national title. They play 4 teams in the top 25. There's only one in the top 10. Now, there are a lot of other good teams there. Going to College Station, not easy. Going to South Carolina and Mississippi State back-to-back, not easy. They got Oklahoma at home. None of it's easy, but if you all of a sudden tell me, yeah, that wide receiver quarterback duo is going to be fire, well, all of a sudden, I mean, that's a team that's going to play a ton of one-possession games this year anyway. They got a really good shot to make the playoff themselves. Those are just some what-ifs floating around my mind. You've got what-ifs, and you've got shopping lists that I know are floating around your household right now. You've got back to school coming up. You've got back to sports coming up. Why not just head over to Academy Sports and Outdoors? Why not go to academy.com if you want to go, but you don't have one in your area? The answer is there is no reason. So check them out. Academy Sports and Outdoors has had our back pretty much forever. They have been a long-time partner. They help us do things like take this show on the road. They help us do things like make this show free of charge to you. And like I always tell you, it's not some chemical plant. It's not some nameless, faceless company that otherwise you'd never interact with. They've got stuff you need in your day-to-day life. They got camping equipment, grilling equipment, baseball, softball, golf, whatever you want, football, back-to-school wear. They got it all. Academy Sports and Outdoors and Academy.com, one-stop shop for back to school, back to sports, just back to life. Just back to life. Maybe the Back to Life tour. Maybe that's what we should call this fall's tour. All right, got Dan Lanning coming up on the show in just a few minutes, so stay locked in for that. I had one of you ask me a question. I tried to get it in on the show the other day, but I ran out of time. And it's okay because it's kind of evergreen, so we can ask it today. Do you have any inclination as to which direction Alabama's defense is going to go this year? Kane Womack is the defensive coordinator there, for those unfamiliar. He was the head coach at South Alabama and left there to be the defensive coordinator under Kalen DeBoer. And there was a weird thing that had happened with Bama defense over the past several years. So from 2009 to 2017, their defensive numbers ranked 2nd, 5th, 1st, 5th, 12th, 3rd, 1st. Okay? Then from 2018 to 2023, 16th, 21st, 32nd, 7th, 18th, 16th. Now, that obviously overlapped with Alabama going a much different direction offensively. And there's always the theory out there, you're not going to do one thing with an offense but keep your defense at the level that it was. It's kind of a seesaw effect. Yeah, I buy into that. So that was then. This is now. You're bringing in another high-powered offensive attack here in Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan running that offense there. And everyone expects points from Alabama. What level is the defense going to play at? Will the defense let them run the ball this year the way they want? This is almost like a what-if, because I picture Alabama in my mind, given the personnel they have, given the staff that just came in, I think run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. I think Jalen Milroe can do that for you. I think they got 3 running backs I would trust to do that. I think I trust especially the interior of that offensive line. I trust to be able to do that. So that's a lot of the trust I have. I don't have a ton of trust, at least now, in established, proven playmaking ability at wide receiver. They got capability. And Jeremy Bernard coming in from Washington, yes, to an extent he's proven. They don't have returning 1,000-yard reception type guys. So that's what I think about. But you don't play that style if you're playing catch-up. And defense goes a long way in providing you that cover to be able to play that style. Think about Michigan last year. Is Michigan running the ball 30 times in a row against Penn State if Penn State's leading 17-13? I really don't think so. So it's fair, I think. And it's also fair to think about the depth they have there. You know, you're used to rolling into a season and looking at Alabama, even if you're not picking them to win it all, you say, well, man, they got this dude, this dude, this dude, and this dude, future first-rounders on defense. Do they have that guy or those guys? Caleb Downs would have been that. He's gone. Got good players there. But is there a Dallas Turner on the edge there? If there is, it comes from, guys whose names you don't know right now. And look, they got former five-star guys littering that roster, like Yanze Pierre, Keon Keeley. Those guys are there. So it's not that they lack talent. They just lack proven talent. On the back end, you heard Nick Saban himself last week at SEC Media Days say their frontline guy's good. I don't know if they've got the depth. If they get banged up, I don't know if they have the depth, which is crazy because Nick Saban built that roster. But they don't have the depth. Well, okay, that means over under 9.5 wins. If you were to look at that, you may say, I could see Bama winning 10 or 11. I'll take the over. Well, if you're an odds maker, like at FanDuel, you have to put that number out considering injury will happen. You just don't know when, you don't know where, but it will happen. So when I look at Bama, I just need them to be top 20 defensively this year. You float in that 10 to 20 range, that's realistic, and that would be good. 20 to 25, even pretty good. You get below that, and then you're probably asking your offense to do a little more than ideally you'd want to ask them to. You're playing some uncomfortable games, but they still have the third best odds right now to win the SEC championship, and it's not too dissimilar from the odds market to win it all. So your guess is as good as Vegas's right now as to what they'll be defensively. We had another question, and we actually have photographic evidence of this one, and I did want to get to this one, and we'll have Dan Lanning coming up in just a few minutes. William from Sumter, South Carolina. He said, why does Florida State get treated differently than Colorado for using the transfer portal very similarly? Ole Miss as well. Well, I do agree that Colorado gets viewed differently. I do agree that people talk about him differently, but I don't think it's for the reasons that you said there, William. I think it's because it's been differently. Florida State, just to give you an idea, Florida State under Mike Norvell, they came in there, and yes, they did lean on the portal pretty heavily, but they didn't lean on it to build their team. They leaned on it to supplement at the outset, but all the while, Mike Norvell has preached high school recruiting, high school recruiting, high school recruiting, and that's now what they've started to lean on a little bit more. Colorado and Deion have never preached that. Yeah, I've almost referred to Colorado as a grand experiment more so than a program, because a program I think about as being built on high school recruiting. Like if Brett McMurphy's writing about you out there, and I say that because we're in the shadow of him right now, and he's talking about your program, he's probably not talking about guys you got from the portal. He's talking about guys that you got from high school, and maybe they disappear for 2 years, and all of a sudden now they've redshirted and they're ready to go. Well, that's not how Colorado's been built. That's not how Deion ever set out to build it. That is how they set out to build it at Florida State. That's how they even set out to build it at Ole Miss. They used the portal heavily. But just to give you an idea of the gulf between those two concepts, the 2023 and 24 cycles, Colorado took 94 kids out of the portal. Ole Miss took 47. FSU took 29. To take it a step further, in the 2023 portal cycle, Colorado took 52 kids. That is more than the second, third, and fourth teams combined took. So there is no comparison, to be clear, with what Deion's been doing versus what Florida State or Ole Miss have been doing. That's the first part. The second part is I think it makes people uncomfortable, and therefore they look for a default reason to criticize Deion Sanders. I also think maybe Deion Sanders' personality just makes him prone to folks wanting to criticize him. I think that maybe if a guy who was buddy and did every talk show out there and returned every text message and made himself available to everyone were to take this approach, I think folks would view it differently. Some of the same ones who criticized Deion Sanders would probably praise whoever else was doing it as a maverick and as a visionary, and nothing would be different about it. There are a lot of folks who are really, really petty in this business. If you got reasons for disliking Deion or not being about what they're about at Colorado, I don't really care. That's fine. Everyone's got an opinion. But if I look at it and you're asking me, is there bias against Colorado with how people talk about them portaling versus how folks talk about FSU and Ole Miss? No, it could be that you have my mentality. It could be that you just really believe that ultimate sustainability has to be built through high school recruiting, and you've never seen anyone try and do what Colorado's doing. Therefore, you may not have great confidence that it's going to work. That has nothing to do with hating on Deion. Quite the opposite. Love Deion Sanders. Love everything he does for the sport. Love what he's about. I got no problem with any of that. It's just a philosophical thing with me. I'm happy to watch him try and prove it wrong, by the way. But that would be the first time that we've ever seen it. So if someone's got doubts about it, I don't think it has to be bias. I think you're just, in a commonsensical standpoint, looking and saying, yeah, this is way different than even the next most radical approach is. All right, we'll get to bold predictions, and then we'll get to Dan Lanning. Bold predictions is a segment that we have been doing year over year now. The bold predictions on this show come from you, and they are the things that you claim you believe enough where you'd put your own money on it this year, and we got some boldness tonight on the show. First up, let's go to Gainesville, Florida. We were there a couple of months ago, and Greg from Chicago said Florida will sneak into the playoffs as the 11th seed. Greg, I'm going to do you a favor. This is already bold enough. I'm not even going to hold you to the 11th seed, because if they make it as the 12th seed, I'm not going to say you were wrong. So let's just say Florida makes the playoff. Even then, that's a 9.5 on the boldness scale. They've had 3 straight losing seasons. To go from that to playoff against this schedule is a bridge a little bit too far for me. Now, Greg, if it does happen, it's a 9.5. It's not a 10, so it could happen. If it does happen, there is a returning quarterback there. It'll probably be because of that. They've got back-to-back top 15 recruiting classes. They've been top 10 in portal. They've got a top 25 returning production roster, and they've got a top 20 talent roster overall. This is the formula with a lighter schedule for a team to make a quantum leap. The thing about Florida is their output could be leaps and bounds better than it has been, and then be a 6-6 or a 7-5 team, just because that's what this schedule dictates. And that's not good enough for a playoff. I wonder if Florida's the one team in the country that, if there's a lot of chaos, might have some on the fringe calling for them to be a playoff considered team at 8-4, which I know drives some of you bonkers, and that's fine. But Florida making the playoff, that's a 9.5 for me. What about the next one? You know Ohio State goes to Oregon, I think it's week 5, week 6, something like that. It's like in the middle part of the season. Doug Zone said Oregon will beat Ohio State by 10+ in Autzen, October 12th. There's the date. That's an 8.75 on the boldness scale. We've got a line on this. FanDuel's got the number right now at Oregon minus 1.5. Autzen Stadium's going to matter a lot here. When is the last premier all-eyes-on-it game that we've seen emanate from Autzen Stadium? You watched Oregon-Washington last year, but that was up at Husky Stadium. You watched Oregon-Washington again, but that was in Las Vegas. I went up 2 years ago to Autzen, and UCLA was in town, but you haven't really had the eyes of America. You haven't really had the eyes of the college football world focused on Autzen Stadium for a premier game in quite a while. This will be it. So you're favored by 1.5 at home. That's adjusted odds makers telling you you'd be about a 2.5 to a 3-point dog neutral site. Oregon secondary will be tested here. So Oregon secondary would be the question of that team, and then the other question is just raw physicality. But here's the other part. So if this were to happen, maybe it's because Ohio State's offensive line's overwhelmed by the noise and the physicality that Oregon can bring. So there's a world where this happens. It's not crazy. We score in 3s and 7s, not 1. So it's not crazy that, you pop a couple on them, boom, that's worth 14 points, and voila, Oregon's won like 38-24 or something like that. It's an 8.75 because Ohio State's a really good team, but it's not impossible. Next up, this one's pretty bold as well, but you got to know schedule to know that this isn't crazy. AJ from Jacksonburg, Ohio. Kyle McCord leads Syracuse to a 10-2 record and an ACC championship game appearance. They don't win it. They just go. That's a 9, but no bolder. Just a 9 on the boldness scale. Kyle McCord's there, transferred in from Ohio State. So they got experience. They got Fran Brown, an entirely new coaching staff up there. Sometimes that's a good thing. Look on your screen. And if you're not watching, if you're listening, let me tell you, the schedule for Syracuse is up. And there is no Clemson. And there is no FSU. And there is Miami. But they're at home, last game of the regular season. So there is a world amidst the Ohio and Holy Cross and at UNLV, and there is a world, UConn's on there as well, there's a world where they're the most anonymous 10-2 team in the world. Not great, but there is a world where that happens. They play 5 of the bottom 8 odds teams in the ACC, so maybe, possibly it's there. That's still a 9, but it's on the fringes of believability, enough for me. And the last one, I'm not going to call this one quite as bold. It's a really fun one. It may be the most fun, bold prediction we've had. Think about all the teams that wear red, and then listen to Grant from Frisco, Texas. 3 of the final 4 teams in the playoff will wear red as their primary color. Okay, so think about those teams. Now, we're counting like maroon, we're counting crimson, we're counting all those. I have the odds to win the title in front of me. These are the teams that wear red. Number 1, number 2, number 5, number 6, number 11, number 14, number 18, 19, 20, 22, and 24. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 of the top 24 teams to win the national championship wear red. Georgia, Ohio State, Bama, Ole Miss, Florida State, A&M, Utah, Oklahoma, USC, NC State, Louisville. I didn't even put Wisconsin in there. Arizona, not in there. Nebraska, Texas Tech, Iowa State, of course, because we all know they're going to play for the Big 12 championship, win that game, and they're an auto bid. They're in. This is an 8.25 for me. There's a lot of good teams that wear red. So I very well could see this. 3 out of the 4. It doesn't have to be a clean sweep. 3 out of the 4 I could absolutely see. So I'm going to make that one an 8.25. Okay, before we get to Dan Lanning and some good stuff coming from the Oregon head coach, remember, any of that you disagree with, you don't just have to shake your head. You don't even just have to call me out or be hateful in the comments. We encourage all of that, but you can go bet it. If you think something's wrong out there, if you look at that odds market, if you look at these numbers that producer Jesse and his team put on the board via graphics, and you say that's crazy, well, go prove it. Go profit off of it. FanDuel is the exclusive odds provider of this show, and we sincerely appreciate them because they make a lot of this stuff possible as well. And more in the season, you're going to see a lot of fun stuff that we do with FanDuel. I know a lot of you watch and you don't bet, and that's totally fine. And if you don't feel like it, I'm not encouraging you to do that. And if you do bet, you need to do it ultra responsibly. You could just go to FanDuel just to look up numbers. I go over there 9 times out of 10 when I go to FanDuel, I actually don't place a bet. And I do bet on this stuff, but I don't place a bet. I'm just going over there to look at numbers and look at line movement, all kinds of sports. Anything under the sun you could bet on is there. So it's fun, man. It's just a resource. And if you want to go above and beyond, if you want to take that next step, you can do that as well. FanDuel, the exclusive odds provider of our show, and we appreciate them. Okay, so I get to the building this morning a little earlier than most because I hit Dan Lanning and I said, hey, you want to do an extended with me? You want to do an extended? We didn't get the speaker series to Eugene, so do you want to bring the Pate State speaker series featuring Oregon to Indy? And to his credit, he said, man, what time do you need me there? And sure enough, I told Lanning, get here like 9:15. And he texted me updates as they were coming. They went and did McAfee because McAfee's here in Indianapolis. So they go do McAfee this morning, and then he got here. He said he was going to be here at 9:20. He got here at 9:18, right up to the set, right on air. And so we got a good 25 to 30 minutes with Dan Lanning. This will be the end of the show after the interview. And so I appreciate you guys so much. Our crew here in Indianapolis has been great. Our crew back in Nashville has been great. We appreciate that. Appreciate you guys watching. Without further ado, here is our sit down from earlier today with Oregon's head coach, Dan Lanning. So at the 50,000-foot level, everybody's saying, man, Dan Lanning in Oregon, Lincoln and USC, all these folks got to change conferences. And it fills up like magazine space. What does it actually mean? Like, you're not in the Pac-12 anymore. You're in the Big Ten. So from the time the season closed on last year to now, what that we don't think about, what that we don't see, have you had to do?
Yeah, there's not a lot outside of you're still trying to build the best roster you possibly can. And I'm a believer in winning football wins, right? It doesn't, regardless of conference. What you do have to do is spend some time starting to recognize your opponents. And we do summer scouting reports on all the teams that we're going to play next year. Get an idea of what the personnel changes are. You know, what are some groupings that we might be in more often than not, and how that changes our team. But what we have to do from a retention and acquisition of talent, you know, that doesn't really change when you're trying to build a great team.
Oregon's one of those teams that gets talked about year-round because you guys are always at or near the top of the recruiting conversation. So I've always felt growing up in like the rural South, I knew about Oregon because there's a uniqueness about Oregon. There's a uniqueness with the tie to Nike, that the way the brand is spread. So I knew about it for a long time. So in a way, Oregon's always been visible nationally. When you join the Big Ten and you're going to play multiple games in time zones that you hardly ever visit as a team, is there like a tangible effect that has on recruiting where all of a sudden people's antennas go up a little bit more? You got 20% better chance of landing this kid than you would have in a previous life?
Yeah, well, it certainly opens up some new recruiting areas for us, some opportunities to go to places we haven't necessarily gone. We've always been a national team, but we're a lot stronger now in the Midwest because of our affiliation with the conference. I think it gives people a clear vision. There's no question things were a little shaky in our last conference, and where that went, Oregon was always a premier team, was going to survive whatever that looked like. But now being affiliated with some of the great traditions in the Big Ten and what that looks like, gives us a great opportunity to go into homes and get great players.
What was life like? It's out of your control. Like, you don't control which conference you guys go into. And I'm sure you may have known a little bit more than those of us on the outside, but you probably were like staring into the fog as well. So when the future's uncertain, knowing you like I think I do, like it's out of sight, out of mind because you don't control it. But at the same time, when you get questions in recruiting, when your staff is asking you questions, when you're reading headlines and everything looks like it's about to fall off a cliff for a conference, I mean, does that affect you at all, or you just got to keep on keeping on?
Well, I think you have to lean in on what you do know, and you said it. Oregon's always been a premier brand. It's always been a place where people see opportunity. It's always been a school that's innovative and ahead of the curve. So you lean in on all that, and then once you get to tie yourself to a conference like the Big Ten and what's been accomplished in this conference with some of the great teams that we get to play, it just sweetens the pot. All
right, so you're entering year 3 now, which means people think they have a lifetime of knowledge about you. You get talked about in year 3 and year 4 as a head coach like guys used to get talked about in year 14 or 15 as a head coach. So everyone else thinks they have you figured out. Do you have you figured out, or is there still a part of Dan Lanning, the head coach, Dan Lanning, the dude, that's just evolving, and you look back 2 years ago and say, wow, I've already changed a pretty good amount in this area or that area?
I hope I keep changing, right? I mean, if you're not changing as a coach, adapting, then you're falling behind. And that's something you learn from Coach Saban, Coach Smart, guys that I've been around, is you have to continue to grow with the game. You have to continue to grow personally if you want your players to grow personally. So that's something that I'm excited about growth. That's something I'm always looking forward to. And I hope the version of me today is different than the version of me 10 years from now, for sure.
Where were you, and what was your first reaction when you saw Coach Saban retired?
I was at my house, hanging out. I got a couple of text messages and phone calls kind of right before.
You thought they were fake?
Yeah. How much that guy did for this game, what he was able to create, and then the opportunity to learn from him. I'm just grateful for the experience to be around him and get to be a fly on the wall there for a little bit.
You, not many guys worked under him, and then you had a run under Kirby Smart at Georgia. So there's like a classroom, basically, you sit in as a coach that not many get exposed to. They see it from the outside. They go to conventions. They text with their buddies who have been on those staffs. But walk people through, from just a viewer-at-home perspective, how intense and how high the standard is in those buildings.
Yeah, it's you can't measure it, right? You can't measure it. It's 4th and 1 every single day. I always said when I went from Sam Houston State to Alabama, like, I'm going here to get my doctorate in football. And that's kind of what I felt like. I got an education as a coach, and then even getting the opportunity to go and coach with Mike Norvell at Memphis, and then go coach with Kirby as well. I think all those places really grew me. It's not necessarily about quantity of experience, but quality. And I was really fortunate in a short window to get some great quality of experience.
When you've been around folks who do things at a high level, and then you get your shot to put your hands on your own wheel, if you've experienced that, I got to imagine it gives you a leg up on maybe other guys that are sort of feeling their way out. It's not that you have all the answers, but you can immediately recall back to when this was operating at this level, it was never acceptable.
Right.
Folks were about to hear it Monday morning in the building.
Right.
And so then it's up to you to execute that. And you find out really quick whether, you're a general or you're just a soldier. When you go from soldier to being a general, especially for the first time, at any level, much less a level like Oregon, what's that transition period like to where now everybody's focused on you instead of you being one of many who are focused on someone else?
Yeah, I think the big piece, great leaders can't be afraid of confrontation, right? You got to be willing to address things as you see them, and you got to be able to say, hey, let's fix it. What I always like to do is be a part of that, right? I'm not just the guy that points out problems. I want to be the guy that's in there helping fix it. I want to get my hands in the dirt and help. And the other benefit of places I've been, when you don't have a strong opinion about how you want to do something, you can kind of lean back and say, well, this is how Coach Smart did it. This is how Coach Saban did it, Coach Norvell did it, Coach Graham, and lean on those experiences. So it's been fun for me to really get to put your own stamp on your program, make it yours, but at the same time be able to lean back on some experiences that you've had.
So when you guys got to the end of last season, you're in the Pac-12 championship game, you come up short, you go to a bowl game and dominate an opponent. Then you got to a period where you can just wholesale self-scout, you can top to bottom forensically analyze your program. What did you see? What were a few of the things you landed on that you thought, I got to adjust this, we got to evolve here, we got to change here?
Yeah, some critical moments. I we started off slow in that last game. The Pac-12 championship certainly hurt us. Ability to stop the run in that game. We've been able to stop the run most of the season. In that game, struggled to do that, but didn't convert in some critical moments. And those are moments that we'll certainly take advantage of. Improving in the kicking game, I think, in special teams play is something that we really want to focus on this year and make an impact on. I think we have great specialists on our team now. Excited to see how they perform. It's a little different, when the lights are bright and the moments are so tight. But those are all things that we really want to attack this season. Being able to run the ball at will when necessary are things that we're really looking at.
Are there aspects that you literally have to be a coach or be behind the scenes to understand the magnitude of and understand the importance that maybe general public doesn't place on it? But you see it and you say, no, we got to hammer this thing every day. And maybe it's something on the field, or maybe it's like a mental neck up sort of thing with the team that you guys hammer on, that the outside world would say, man, they spend a lot of time on that. Why are they spending so much time on that?
Yeah, I think just the physicality of the game. I still believe football is meant to be played a certain way. And I think people would be surprised if they came to our practice how physical those practices are, how intense they are. We always want to make practice harder than the game. And, having a 50,000-foot view, you might not see the work that's put in, on a Tuesday practice, the contact that occurs at a practice. So that's something that's really important to us.
So that bleeds into the follow-up, which is having the depth required to practice like that. And then also you've got the fact that you may have to play 17 games to get where you ultimately want to get.
Right.
So then the question becomes, okay, well, how do you balance a practice schedule, the level of physicality you're going to have in practice, and then also you get into fourth quarters, you're up 24, and there are 9 minutes left on the clock. Do you handle that any differently now, knowing the workload you're putting on guys and knowing how far you got to go versus the way you would have 5 years ago?
Yeah, you have to have your thumb on your team and have a really good understanding where your team's at. That's one thing I spent some time visiting with some NFL coaches this season about, okay, longer season, what's that look like for you at the end of the season as opposed to the beginning? Putting a priority on what's important, right? What's an important piece of practice that has to be contact and what isn't. And then just understanding your team. 10 years ago, if a team was down, 14 points with 2 minutes to go, the game was over.
Yep.
That's not the case anymore in college football. It is a little bit more the case in this conference, right? Some great defenses played in this conference. So that's something we'll continue to figure out, and it goes back to why I think the most important trait for a head coach right now is adaptability. Right? Understand your team, creating an experience to develop your roster. The depth of your roster is really important, so all those things add up.
All right, so when I see you guys land someone in recruiting, I'm going to put out the WWE gif, and that's the end of it for me, okay? Oregon got a big-time recruit. That's it. I noticed it. I'm done. Other people want to explain it, though. It can't just be this. It's got to be that as well. And so half the time, in fact, 3/4 of the time I look and the allegations are legal, so it doesn't really matter. But there's also this hidden connotation that, well, if not for this, they wouldn't be doing that.
Right.
Can you explain the process, A to Z, in a condensed time period of what goes into recruiting, even with NIL resources in your back pocket, and what it actually takes to land a guy?
Yeah, absolutely. Recruiting, it's not one thing. It's 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. It's the evaluation, right? It's the 321 different schools that we hit this offseason, in spring recruiting. It's the 23 satellite camps. It's the phone conversations, the text message threads. It's the relationship building. And all that's built to have an opportunity to sit at the table, right? To have a seat at the table at the end to be in that discussion. And then is NIL a part of it? Absolutely. Find a top 10 team that's not a part of their program right now. You better be willing to do it and figuring out ways to do it. And it's a part of our process, but not the only part of our process. So a lot of pieces go together. For a long time, Oregon's been signing elite players, whether it's DeAnthony Thomas or Kayvon. And for a long time, Oregon's been innovative. At one point it was, well, their jerseys are cool, and that's why kids are going. Well, they have great facilities. And what Oregon's done is they've adapted to the times and found out the best way to do things in correlation with an unbelievable staff that works their tail off every day, right? That's on the phones, recruiting, spending time developing relationships, and then a great product that your players brag on. Your best recruiting advocates for you are the players on your team. And when our players can speak about their experience at Oregon, and then the proof's in the pudding, you can look at a guy like Bo Nix that ends up being a first-round pick right here and was developed. You can point to that success, and then have all the other pieces of the puzzle that matter.
See, here's what's funny about what you just said. So I could have a $1 trillion NIL bag at Pate State. I could do that, and I could just go be the highest bidder for every kid. I could do that.
get them all, probably.
I could also 2 years later have the class fall apart.
Absolutely.
Because I didn't really have any adhesive. Guys came there for a very, very fundamental reason.
Right.
And then there's really nothing keeping them there. So we've seen high-profile classes do that in the past 3 years, is my point. So that's my comeback on a lot of that is, okay, well, go find those guys 2 years later. Can they be your best recruiters? Because if they are actively recruiting others to the program, it means there was a lot more drawing them there than just something that honestly is not really going to be visible for them if they take care of themselves 10 years down the road. Because 10 years down the road, they're going to be making generational money.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, rooted in substance, right? Like, there has to be substance behind it. I'm really proud of the fact that we haven't lost a starter in my time since being the coach here to the portal. I think that speaks to the culture we have within our team. I think it also speaks to our ability to take care of our players. And one thing about Oregon is if we say something, we do it too, right? And there's a lot of false promises out there in college football. But when you look at the truth of our program and the people within our program, you see guys that have come here, gotten better, had success, had opportunities to go play in the NFL and win a lot of games here, which matters.
Which coaches in the Big Ten do you have the closest relationship with?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, it's really fun sitting in those Big Ten meetings because you see a bunch of guys that are really competitive, but really good guys that care about football, right? And, you know, PJ Fleck's a guy that I never knew before, but getting to bump into him and having an impression that I thought, and then the reality of who he is, the guy he is you know, really unbelievable. You know, what Brett brings to the conference with his experience in the NFL and the different places he's been is really an advocate for our group at Illinois. You know, Jed's a guy that I've obviously had familiarity with his time at Arizona and got to connect with. But there's a lot of guys in this conference that I have a lot of respect for. And just being able to sit in the same room as them, getting to sit in the same room as Kirk Ferentz is pretty awesome. I'm still one of those guys that pinch myself and say, hey, what am I doing in here? You know, so it's fun. Now, what's hard in college football, we don't really get to be friends anymore.
Right.
We're all competing with each other. But there's a level of respect. You know, Matt Rule's a guy that I'd sat away from for a long time and seen from a distance. Getting to know that guy cares about his team. He cares about his players. He cares about the game of football. So that's been fun for me to experience.
Now, there are a lot of folks in my industry that I grew up reading, I grew up watching, or I grew up listening to that now I'm in the same lane as.
Right.
But in our world, in the digital on-demand world, I don't have to compete against them. They can just watch anything they want to at any time. In your world, if they beat you, that's an L for you, that's a W for them. Right. And there's the added effect of, like, you just mentioned it. You kind of grew up looking up to some of these guys you've probably taken from a lot of them.
Right.
How surreal is it? You can't focus on this on game day, but like on a non-game day, if you just look in the mirror and have a pinch myself moment for 30 seconds, how surreal is it, especially knowing your story and the atypical route you took to get where you are? How crazy is it to think, wait a second, like when we take the field on Saturday, I got the same job here as that guy has there. Like, we're equals now.
Yeah, unbelievably blessed and certainly fortunate to do it, but it's no different than when I go play, you know, knockout with my son. I want to win, right? And winning's important. So I'm grateful for being there, but you don't want to get so caught up in the moment that you don't recognize what's the mission at hand.
So when I look at you guys, I don't think most of the country would be able to just rattle off Oregon's too deep on the D-line.
Right.
But yet in totality, that group looks ready to compete in this conference.
Right.
And we were talking about how you have to have adequate depth to practice the way you want to at a level of physicality, also in November to be able to stand up, and then December, and then January. How good do you feel about the versatility and depth you guys have on the front?
I'll feel a lot better once we go play some games, right? But I do feel like for the first time we have a complete depth chart to the point to where we can practice the way you have to. We can develop both halves of our roster. And we have a group that can play, that has size, girth, athleticism, and if we do a great job coaching them, these guys can really perform on the field.
Were there any, being general here, were there any tweaks that you guys thought, because we're going to this conference, we need to change in terms of nutrition or strength and conditioning, or is the Oregon plan the Oregon plan?
Yeah, really our plan hasn't changed. It's about how fast we can get there, right? I always knew D-line play mattered, especially from the place I just came from, right? D-line is really important, and our D-line today looks a lot different than our D-line did when I first got there, right? And so the formula for winning football, that certainly matters. Now, there's no doubt in this conference that there's the level of physicality and the way the game's played, but that still translates back to winning football.
This new NCAA rule where you've got different on-field staffers being able to coach than you used to be able to have, I looked at that and I said, there may not be a ton of change I can make right now, but when I get to December, when I get to January, I could probably go to the G5 level or FCS level if I'm a major program, and I could take position coaches or maybe even coordinators and bring them here as off-field analysts who benefit really tangibly because they're getting on-field coaching experience at Oregon on their resume. How much do you think that rule change is going to benefit your coaching depth?
Yeah, for us personally, I'm excited because sometimes we lose landscape of the people in your program, developing the people in your program. And there was an avenue for a while where it's hard to develop young coaches in your program because they never get the opportunity to coach.
Right.
So could you go poach other programs' best coaches? Absolutely. For me, I'm way more excited about seeing our young coaches grow. We want to create an environment at Oregon where we can promote within. Right, a coach moves on, he gets an opportunity that we're really excited about for him. Now this gives us the opportunity to help develop the next guy on the roster, the next man up, and they have to be talented enough to do that. So you can't sacrifice talent. Will there be some of that happens where teams lose a great coach because he's at a smaller level and he sees an opportunity? Absolutely, and it might be something we'll assess. But more importantly, I'm excited for the young coaches on our staff and some of the coaches on the sideline on our staff that don't have to be on the sideline anymore. They can actually, be on the paint.
How do you balance the idea in your head that you want to maintain continuity of staff? Yeah. Everyone would love things not to change if you have it in a sweet spot, but yet you still want to promote an environment and foster an environment where your guys are working towards their goals and you want to help them achieve their goals. A lot of them want to be coordinators or head coaches.
Right.
Like, what's the balance? And man, I hate to lose this guy, but man, I'm happy for this guy.
Well, I got to remember how I got here.
You're right.
Right? And I got to remember my path and my goals and my aspirations. So I've always put my goals in my mirror. My number one goal in my mirror right now is help my people live out their dreams and aspirations. Now, in our staff and in our organization, it's about accountability, right? For you to achieve those goals, here's what I had to do to get there,
right.
And here's what you have to be able to do to get there. And the benefit of that is when the team's first, the rest takes care of itself. The opportunities are going to come your way whenever you do a great job.
What's it like having a conversation with a guy? If they do come to you, I assume guys will come to you to get your advice about their upward mobility, and you'd have a meeting with them about that at some point during the year anyway. When a guy thinks he's ready, could be a player, when a player thinks he's ready to start, when a coach thinks he's ready to elevate, and you think almost, but not quite, how gentle or how stern does the messaging have to be in just delivering truth back to the other side of the table?
That's the part. Deliver the truth, right? Give them the truth, and people are going to make decisions best for them, what they think is best for themselves in that moment and opportunity. I'm not going to trick anybody to staying into our program. And what happens when there is change, when there is some transition, that's also an opportunity of growth in your program. But you don't want to lose, A+, especially if they're not ready. So you fight to keep them. But on the same note, you give them truth. And if they are ready, you remember that somebody gave you that opportunity too, and you got to give them that opportunity to move on.
We were having a conversation with another coach the other day, and there was an era, frankly, when I was coming out of high school, there was the era of specialized sports, focus on playing one sport, and some of us got tricked into that. Fortunately, that's waned a little bit, and you got some pretty high-level guys that still play multiple sports, some of them even into the college level. How often do you deal with that in recruiting? Guy, baseball, basketball, and football. And, Coach, I may want to continue that. How beneficial is that from a skill standpoint, and how do you handle those conversations?
Yeah, at Oregon, that's really who we are. If you look at our team, you'll see a Golden Glove winner there playing linebacker and Bryce Betcher, and I think he was fourth this year on our fourth or fifth this year on our team in tackles. So he's able to do both. You see Rod Pleasant out there playing corner and then running track in the spring. So this is a place where we really embrace that. We love recruiting guys that are multi-sport athletes. But what's great about our place, you actually could get the opportunity to do that after you come here as a player as well, and proof's in the pudding. I've been a lot of places where they say that, and then you get to campus and spring ball rolls around and coach is saying, wait.
We're not still doing that.
We're not doing that.
Yeah.
We just told you that. No, like at our place, it's you can see it. It's actually happened. Bryce Betcher is a great example of that. Rod Pleasant is a great example of that. At one point, Oregon's 4x1 team was all football players. I think that's awesome for the sport. I think that's awesome for all sports. And it's certainly something we embrace at our place.
If you're the kind of place that delivers on promises, how often do you hear from guys, maybe coaches, but mostly players, who chose somewhere else? They go somewhere else. Maybe they got there. Maybe it wasn't what they thought it'd be. And maybe it's just random Tuesday. You see a text, hey, man, miss you guys. Probably would do it different if I could do it over again. Is that common, or is that more fantasy?
It certainly happens. And that's where I think in recruiting it matters to not. Don't always be bad. You shouldn't always feel bad about finishing second, because sometimes that might come full circle. And we do a great job of maintaining relationships with guys, even if they don't choose our place. I want to see kids be successful. I want to see players go in and change their family's future, and I want to see guys that love football have success. So sometimes it's a great lesson for them, and it might translate to a decision they make down the road. You know, maybe they didn't pick here, but down the road they're going to be a better decision maker when they get that opportunity and evaluate everything that's around them, and that's the benefit.
Folks have been talking. So folks have been talking around Indy all week. Not how the duck got in the river, but who knew about the duck? Did you know about the duck ahead of time?
I'd maybe heard about the duck. I'm really fighting right now to get this inflatable duck to travel to all of our away games. I think that would maybe bother people a little bit, and I don't mind bothering people. It means maybe you're doing something.
No, the more people bother, the better. I want to know about deployment. Is that something you just pull out at 3 a.m.?
I didn't actually institute. Like, I wasn't the one inflating that thing, but
really,
I would love to see that video.
But if you wink at me, I know what that means. You don't have to admit anything publicly. Okay, so
we're mighty different around here. That's certainly something that's a little bit different.
Let me tell you something. A lot of these places you're going to play, there's no water nearby.
Yeah,
so
maybe
that thing,
a cornfield.
Yeah, that thing may stay in storage, the airplane hangar. Okay, so you came here. You were nice enough to hit us first today. So we're talking in the morning before you do this.
Yeah.
They're going to ask you a million questions today, but the one or two things you have circled, bright red Sharpie, this is the thing that we have to nail for this year's team to be what it needs to be. What is that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that there's a lot of that other than really creating a team again. I don't know if people realize in college football, I think everyone does, how much teams change. You know, in my 2 years here, we have 10 players on our roster right now that were there when we got there. It's a different team. And this year we brought in a lot of players as well. So it's about how quickly can you become a team. We have guys that have experience, some at other places, some here. But it's about developing your roster and getting to play as a team and be unselfish. It's really hard in college football now, but we have a team that really believes in that. So those are the pieces that are going to matter. Playing to our standard, not necessarily playing to our opponent. I think it's something we really got to focus on this year as well.
Dan Lanning, we appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it, man.